I want to discuss about what athleticism is in boxing and why a lot of people bring up this topic in regards to different fighters that exhibit very, very excellent reflexes. And we've seen this throughout the years, we've seen it with various fighters, but when you're talking about athleticism, everyone gets thrown off by that term, but I know exactly what they mean when they say athleticism, because athleticism, man, like it comes from your fast twitch muscle fibers, and it comes from being first, like compared to a lot of fighters. And guys like Roy Jones had some of the fastest punches ever in the sport of boxing, Sugar Ray Leonard. And you could even go back to Sugar Ray Leonard's Olympic fights, his amateur fights, and he still have fast hands. Matter of fact, they make YouTube shorts right now of Sugar Ray Leonard doing uh, punch combinations when he was still in the Olympics, and sometimes even gifts too. I've seen that before. But to get to the point, about athleticism in boxing, it's not about how chiseled you are. It's not about how well, you could be chiseled at the same time, but it's really about your fast if you're a fast twitch fighter or not, and a lot of fighters have that. I've seen a lot of fighters like today, like Rashidi Ellis, Jaron Ennis. Who else? I don't want to say Canelo because Canelo developed it, like throughout time, because that's more so of a timing thing. He has fairly fast hands, like over the years, but it's not necessarily like a Gary Russell. It's not necessarily like who else? Yeah, man, the examples that I already named, but that's more so timing that Canelo has. And when you're talking about other fighters like that aren't necessarily fast-handed, but they're fleet of foot, like Ireslandi Lara, Guillermo Rigondeaux, who else? Anybody with good footwork has a fairly great athleticism, because that does require a lot of energy that you have to exert from your body. And that's why I think that's what I think everybody means when they talk about athleticism. And athleticism does play a part, but at the same time, like athleticism relies on a balance too. If you're gonna be successful, it relies on a balance of skill set, and it relies on a balance of athleticism, obviously, and your ring IQ as well, your intellect. So I think there's very few fighters that have that. Terrence Crawford, I think, has like a balance of fairly all of them, but at the same time, he's not necessarily like a fast twitch fighter like that either, like Roy Jones or anything. But he does rely a little bit on his athleticism because he is a very, very in shape athlete, but at the same time, like he doesn't uh use his punches like how Roy Jones would, just sweeping in with a check left hook. He just relies on his athleticism to a certain extent. The way that he uh, loops his punches, the way that he uses his legs. He uses his legs at times, and he's a very good boxer. And you also have examples like Andre Ward too. Andre Ward is also a good athlete, but he's not necessarily this guy that relies on athleticism. He's a very sufficient fighter. He's a very efficient fighter as well because he knows like when to save his energy for a certain part of the fight, which you've seen in the Sergey Kovalev fights and various fights of his. Carl Froch, um, who else? Mikhail Kessler. So that's what I think about athleticism and its discussions in the sport of boxing. Everyone always like hates on it too, man. Like they're like, "Ah, oh, man, you're talking about this certain fighter has athleticism." Nah, man. I mean, it just is what it is. You either have it or you don't. I mean, look at Prince Nassim Hamed. He had athleticism. He had power, but he didn't have that balance of a ring IQ. And that's why he couldn't last. And then you also had some other fighters, like Salvador Sanchez, and he had a balance of all of them. Athleticism, power, and ring IQ. So um, that all depends on the individual. Like how you want to apply athleticism playing a big factor in a lot of fights, but most of the time it really doesn't because you see a lot of prospects, like start falling apart as soon as they rely on athleticism. Like recently, Josh Kelly. Uh, I know there were some other fighters that were supposed to be good, just because they came out of the Olympics or who they sparred or who they put in work with. And they just like fall apart, because they don't really understand fundamentals. They don't understand how to use a jab at times. They don't understand ring awareness, So that's what I think about boxing and athleticism and where it takes its precedence in boxing. So let me know what you guys think about that.